This weekend on the Gold Coast, representatives from New South Wales communities affected by coal seam gas drilling will get the opportunity to share information and work on strategies with their Queensland counterparts at the Lock the Gate Alliance annual general meeting. Community opposition to the coal seam gas industry is growing as fast as the industry is developing, with pressure on state governments to heavily regulate the sector. In New South Wales, the Greens have introduced legislation for a 12-month moratorium on coal seam gas development and a total ban on the industry in metropolitan areas. Shortly, a studio discussion between Greens MLC Jeremy Buckingham and the coal seam gas industry's Ross Dunn. But first, Sharon O'Neill reports on an industry with its foot on the gas.
Sydney. It's Australia's most expensive piece of real estate. But its wealth is not only what lies above the ground, but what lies beneath.
The industry certainly has big plans for Sydney. They would like to see dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of coal seam gas wells across the Sydney metro area.
Almost a kilometre below the surface of the Sydney Basin lies a rich source of coal seam gas. This gas, or methane, occurs naturally within coal deposits and is considered to be an environmentally friendly energy source. But it is the extraction process which has many worried.
What we're learning from the United States is that this is not an industry that can be integrated into residential areas. The pollution of water and the health impacts in terms of releasing hydrocarbons into the atmosphere are quite serious.
In 2008, a petroleum exploration licence was issued by the former Labor government for 2,386 square kilometres, extending from Kurnell to Gosford and west to Eastern Creek. St Peter's, in the densely populated inner west of Sydney, was chosen as the first drilling site.
We were completely outraged that there had basically been no notification of the local public, that this had been planned for over 2 years at the time, and nobody knew about it. No one knew a thing about it.
I've had no letter drops, I've had no one come to speak to me, no one.
The residents of the inner city quickly mobilised to express their anger at the state government's decision to open the door to drilling in a metropolitan area. But across the state, others were also complaining. Apart from the Sydney Basin, there are 3 other areas in New South Wales that are rich in coal seam gas. The Clarence Moreton Basin in the northeast of New South Wales, the Gunnedah Basin in the central part of the state, and the Gloucester Basin near Newcastle. In every one of these locations, well-organised community groups are making it clear they do not want coal seam gas wells in their areas.
This industry is just in its infancy at the moment. We're only talking a few thousand coal seam gas wells, but its plans for expansion are enormous.
Just after being elected, the O'Farrell government placed a 60-day moratorium on the granting of new coal seam gas and petroleum exploration licences in New South Wales. But the Greens have now introduced legislation into the Parliament which goes much further. They want a 12-month moratorium and a full inquiry into coal seam gas development. The bill would also prohibit coal seam gas drilling within the Sydney metropolitan area.
The really big problem is that if something goes wrong, if there's a failure, and we've seen 2 recent failures, both at Arrow in Queensland and with AGL out in Camden, is that depending on the size of the failure, remediation is impossible.
There's a lot of concern about it, but I think there's also a lot of disbelief about it as well. Certainly people I've spoken to are concerned. We've all got our no gas signs and banners up. But I think probably until something it actually starts, I think that's when people will realise that it is in fact a reality.
Joining us now from Brisbane is Ross Dunn, Director of the Australian Petroleum Production and Exploration Association, and here in Sydney, Jeremy Buckingham MLC, the Greens spokesman on mining and coal seam gas. Gentlemen, welcome. Ross Dunn, we know coal seam gas is a game changer in energy in North America. What is the estimated dollar value of recoverable coal seam gas in New South Wales? We want everybody to be able to gauge the economic benefits of this potentially very lucrative industry.
Quentin, to get an estimate of the size of this industry, you'd want to look at the estimate of the resource. In Eastern Australia, which is New South Wales and Queensland, the resource has been estimated by CSIRO at 250 trillion cubic feet. Now that is sufficient energy, if you extrapolate that, to power Queensland and New South Wales for 400 to 500 years. In Queensland, where we've had 3 projects approved to go from coal seam gas to liquefied natural gas for export, each of those projects is an investment of some $15 billion and an employment of 6,000 people. So on a state basis it's large, and there's no reason why New South Wales can't be that size.
Jeremy Buckingham, can you see the potential for the economy from this industry to thousands of property owners with cash flow that would come to them?
The cash flow would certainly go to the big multinational gas companies. These companies have their eyes on New South Wales. They're set for a massive expansion. But before they do so, we think that the environmental and social issues that this industry will foist upon the community should be properly investigated. This is a huge industry, hundreds of billions of dollars, and they're set to expand in New South Wales.
Ross Dunn, is it true that the industry in New South Wales has been granted a royalty holiday from the New South Wales government? You'll pay no royalties here for the first 5 years.
Well, the government of the day, in taking that decision, recognised, as has the Productivity Commission in its report yesterday, that there is a real benefit to the environment in moving from coal-generated power to gas-fired power. And this, I would see as an inducement to industry to pick up the cudgel and develop this new resource for New South Wales, as is happening in Queensland.
Jeremy Buckingham, 5-year moratorium on royalties, fair enough to get the industry started?
Well, before you get the industry started, you need to get to the bottom of the science of the impact of this industry on the environment. I think the government's thrown open the doors to this industry and put the cart before the horse. We need to know whether or not this industry is going to do long-term damage to our communities, to our environment, to our groundwater before we throw open the doors.
Well, how about that, Mr Dunn? Wouldn't a 12-month moratorium, as Mr Buckingham suggests, for New South Wales, because it's highly contentious right through the rural and now metropolitan communities, a 12-month moratorium, an inquiry, get the ground rules set here so there's no accidents which could potentially damage the reputation of your industry?
Well, this comes back to what standard is the industry expected to meet that it hasn't already met through independent government assessment at both state and federal levels, where an EIS, which takes years to develop, has been examined in minute detail, and in doing that they have considered the impacts on the Great Artesian Basin and its aquifers, and conditions have been applied in granting approval. This, to me, is a way of furthering an anti-fossil fuel campaign. This is nothing more to me than a scare campaign.
We're sure the Greens don't want to go to gas; they want to go to renewables, wind and solar. We know that. But the question is for you, Mr Dunn: do you accept that there is an onus of proof on your industry about these environmental questions?
This industry is very conscious of its potential to impact on landholders and the environment. And I would just have to refer to Queensland, where we have just recently examined every gas well, which is 2,719 gas wells. 5 of those gas wells had a fugitive leak at a level which would have held a flame. Now, 5 in a percentage terms is insignificant, but it's still 5 too many. The point is that there is excessive, not excessive, but there is a large amount of regulation on this industry, a very large amount of regulation, and the industry is comfortable with that level of transparency.
Well, I think Ross, with all respect, has just given the game away. He says that the regulation's excessive. I don't think the industry has any idea what impact they're having on the Great Artesian Basin. I don't think they've got any idea what their long-term impact is going to be on productive farmland. And one of the key elements with this industry is the amount of toxic chemicals they're injecting into our groundwater. They're injecting that into the groundwater. They're only recovering some of it. Where it's going, we don't know. The Great Artesian Basin is not well understood, and to be putting in, as Ross has said, already thousands of coal seam gas wells in Queensland in the basin, and with more planned for New South Wales, the government should be taking the precautionary approach and putting the long-term health of the environment and our communities before a rush to embrace gas.
This is nothing more than a scare campaign to show that coal seam gas development is untried and untested. And to me, this is just a step in the program against fossil fuels, and leading that is the demonisation of hydraulic fracturing, which is the fracking process which Jeremy has alluded to with
persuade us.
chemicals.
We'll give you an opportunity. Persuade us that it's safe and there is no aquifer contamination or pollution or any other adverse impacts from fracking.
Well, hydraulic fracturing has been used in the world for over 60 years. It's used around the world in oil and gas production. It has had the clean bill of tick from the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, and more recently by the British House of Commons. So I'd say the science is on our side, and I would ask Jeremy to refer me to a scientific assessment which shows that fracking is bad.
Well, I can do that. The National Toxics Network is saying that most of the chemicals involved in this fracturing have some negative impact on human health. We do not know what their long-term impacts will be on those aquifers, and APIA are very keen to say, oh, well, these chemicals that they're using in fracturing, in the fracking process, are quite innocuous and they're found in household daily use. But the key issue is, with chemicals, it's about the dose and the frequency of exposure.
That water is not water which is drinking water. It is not. It is geologically isolated. It is geologically isolated from the aquifers from which landholders access water.
Just a moment, Mr. Buckingham. Is there any case around the world where there's been acknowledged aquifer contamination damaging to human health or livestock or anything else?
Yeah, absolutely.
How many cases?
Well, there are hundreds of cases of this. Wherever this fracking occurs, you're producing toxic water. The industry not only injects the toxic chemicals into the groundwater, those toxic chemicals are turning up in people's drinking water supplies, people who are dependent on bore water for drinking water supplies, and it's also turning up in groundwater because the water goes. They pump the chemicals into the coal seam wellhead, and then they pull it out through what's called produced water, and they have to deal with that water. It's toxic.
This is an unfounded fear campaign, Jeremy. Produce the information, the scientific report that backs it up.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been numerous instances in the United States where there's been referrals to the EPA, there's been referrals to state bodies, and even in New South Wales, just last week, we saw a coal seam gas well venting unknown chemicals into the atmosphere, and that company, AGL, in Camden, on the southern suburbs of Sydney, self-referred themselves to the EPA. Now, it's not good enough for these companies to be self-regulating. We need to do the thorough assessment, and I don't see what APIA and the coal seam gas industry have got to be afraid of.
Telling the authority that there was an event that they need to be aware of, to me, shows that self-regulation is working. Just because there was a spectacle doesn't mean there was anything actually bad happening. And AGL did explain what was actually happening in that well.
Yes, what they said, Quentin, was that there was soap, and they called it soap, and it's surfactant, but everything that had ever been in that well was being pumped into the atmosphere, and the only reason that they self-referred was that me and my staff were on the scene to video it. And so I don't see why there's this resistance to a moratorium.
Quentin, I just wanted to put the question to Jeremy. Given that the Productivity Commission in its report yesterday said that the most efficient way of carbon abatement is to move from coal to gas-fired power generation, why, when New South Wales is 89% reliant on coal and only 4% reliant on gas for its power generation, would they want to stop the development of a new energy resource which, in its absence, will leave New South Wales with no choice but coal, and more coal, to meet an expected 60% increase in power?
That may be the most economically efficient, but it doesn't account for the environment, the ecology. We believe that we should be moving to renewable energies, and if coal seam gas gets its foot in the door in New South Wales, it will suck up the enormous amount of capital that should be going to baseload solar thermal, to wind, to really sustainable renewable energies. If we go with gas, it means we won't go solar, and that's our concern.
Productivity Commission in its report has just shown that the most efficient way of carbon abatement is to move from coal to gas-fired power generation. So therefore, that is the best thing for the environment. And you're saying that
coal
is the
seam
worst
gas
thing for the environment.
or natural gas or conventional gas?
Or gas.
Oh, yeah, but there's gas and there's gas.
OK, gentlemen.
Coal seam gas is natural gas, is methane.
Ross Dunn, Jeremy Buckingham, thanks very much.
Thanks, Quentin.
Thanks.